Well, God releases, defeats one last rebellion, and then forever punishes Satan. It says in verse 7, the 1,000 years have expired, Satan's released. Verse 10, the devil who deceived them was cast in the lake of fire and brimstone. But don't miss this. This is one of those moments you should, kind of wake up and pay attention to, where the beast and the false prophet are. Whoop. When did they get there? 1,000 years ago. That's yesterday. In Revelation 19, at Armageddon, the beast and false prophet are captured, those two, and thrown alive, it says in chapter 19, into the lake of fire. 1,000 years of being in hell has passed. And look at verse 10. Where the beast and the false prophet were, is it like a bug? You know those bug zappers, the purple lights, they hang out, around your patio at night so that all the flying bugs will go, and they're gone. And they're all piled up at the bottom, dead. Is that what hell is? It's over? After 1,000 years, the beast and the false prophet are still being punished, and then that's Satan, the beast, the false prophet. Now there's 3 in hell. Those 3, will be tormented day and night forever and ever. That's where we get the eternal nature of hell. Hell reminds us to always fear the holiness of Jesus. It's amazing to think of the great white throne. Verse 12, the dead, small and great, standing before God. Everybody that's ever lived, God reconstitutes them to their body. I mean, bodies were blown in battle or buried and turned to dust and plowed up, and the dust went into streams, and it went all over the world, and they become part of a cornfield and a tree, all the molecules that were them. But God gets them all back together, and they stand before God, and the books are opened, and another book is opened, which is the book of life, the eternal registry of those who have been washed in the blood of the Lamb, and they haven't been. They never called in the name of the Lord. They never received forgiveness. God still has a record of all their sins. It wasn't transferred to Christ. And they were judged according to their works. By the way, you know what Paul's comment is on this judgment? He said they all stand there without excuse. Have you ever been in court? A judge will say, do you have anything to say? I'm not guilty. You never find anybody in prison or in anything that's ever guilty of anything. You know what God says through the Apostle Paul? Every single person stands there in front of God's throne. And God gets all done listing off every sin they've ever done. He has a record of every attitude and action and word and deed. And they just stand there and they say, you're right. You're righteous. They're without excuse. And then it says in verse 13, the sea gives up the dead, death and hell delivers up all those that are in the grave, and they are judged, each one according to his work, and death and Hades are cast in the lake of fire. This is the second death, and here it is, anyone not found written, again in the book of life, was cast in the lake of fire. That brings us to the most hideous doctrine of the Bible, hell. This is what Jesus said, who is the authority on hell, who talks about it more than anybody else. The sons of the kingdom will be cast out into outer darkness, where there will be, here's the first thing, weeping, and second thing, gnashing of teeth. That's when you grind your teeth together, because you can't even talk, it's so bad. Look at this. Jesus said, where their worm does not die, they never forget. I know some people say that worms are eating them. That's great. Great if worms are real worms, but it really probably is what we see with the rich man, that he's remembering everything, and the fire is not quenched. But this is the short version. Hell is worse than we ever thought. What we're reading about right now, in the glow of God's glory, surrounding his throne, we already talked about last week, stand the redeemed of all the ages. We're there. Behind them, countless ranks are all the angelic hosts, and the 4 angel creatures are hovering around God's presence. The 24 elders are standing and kneeling before the throne. And while this is going on, the dead, small and great, are assembled. And they're wherever they're gathered. And every single person comes up who's ever lived. Not one soul escapes the summons to the court of the Almighty God. and they're brought up one by one, declared guilty by their own words and deeds and thoughts that God replays for them. Did you know our brains have 600 octillion synaptic connections? A synapse, is an electronic cross point. It's kind of like a 0 and a 1 in binary language and programming, in computer memory and all that. We have 600 octillion, O-C-T, tillion. Did you know there are more connections in your brain than there are known stars in the universe? If you add all the galaxies they've thought about that there are and all the billions of stars, 600 octillion, there are more synaptic connections than there are known stars in the universe. Our brains have unbelievable capacity, and they're recording every thought, every deed, every word. I know we forget them. You're forgetting the outline of Revelation and hoping to remember it in time for the test. But it's all recorded. And God plays it back. And their own words, their own deeds, their own thoughts, they bow their heads and say, "You're righteous. I'm not." And they're cast in the lake of fire forever. Everyone in hell, by the way, believes. Everyone in hell is a believer. But they believe too late. Now we know already, James tells us, you believe that there's one God. By the way, James, Jesus' earthly brother, was teaching the first church in Jerusalem. He was the first pastor of the church in Jerusalem. And he was preaching to the first church, the ones born again and baptized and joining the church on Pentecost, those people. And he's preaching to them because some of them aren't even Christians after going through that. And he says, you believe there's one God? Great. The demons believe that and shake. Did you know all demons are believers? In fact, all demons are orthodox believers. Orthodox in the sense of what it means. Ortho means straight and doc is doctrine. They have straight doctrine. They believe in the deity. They believe in the death, burial, and resurrection because they saw it. They believe in the creation because they know he's the creator. They believe in God. They're orthodox. They're not Mormons or Muslims. They're all what we would call absolutely orthodox doctrine believers. The demons, the fallen angels, they're not saved. They're scared. But of course, they can't be saved. But what the lesson is that you can believe all of the facts, but if it never, remember what Jesus said? You don't do the will of my Father in heaven. You practice unrighteousness, lawlessness. See, when you believe right, you behave right. If you believe right, you will behave right. See, that's what the Bible says. Well, it's almost time to go. Earth is crashing. It's dying. Start collecting the headlines. It's a great talking point with people. Earth is crashing. Earth is dying. And Jesus left us here to take people with us to heaven. When Bonnie and I were serving in one church, of course, we always got to know our missionaries, and they'd come home, and it's a great thing. A lot of you are going to be missionaries. We're missionaries. And we would get to know them. We got to know one. He was a pastor of a church in Ethiopia, the International Church of Addis Ababa in Ethiopia. And so it was Thanksgiving, actually. We got a fax. Do you know what a fax is? Probably you don't. It's a piece of paper that used to come out of a machine, and it would make a sound and go tick, 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 tick. And it was like an email, only on paper, that came through the telephone lines. It's really, faxes are amazing. And by the way, it discolored, and you couldn't read it after a little while. Let me read to you the fax. Flight 961 was a typical flight, one that occurs thousands of times every day around the world. Ethiopian Air Flight 961 took off November 23rd from Addis Ababa. On board were 163 passengers and 12 crew members. Among those flying that Saturday were Mr. and Mrs. Andy Meekins. Andy was an elder at my church. This is the pastor missionary that's talking. The International Evangelical Church of Addis, that large Bible-believing church, was pastored by that dear friend of mine. In 2 hours of that flight, more than 120 people died, including 5 people from that church that our missionary served. Andy, the elder, never survived. Somewhere near Kenya, the hijack began. An unidentified number of men declared themselves escaped convicts, taking the flight to Australia. Things turned horrible. They brandished an axe and a supposed bomb, stormed the flight deck, savagely beat the pilot, threw him, and proceeded to order the other pilot to turn the plane eastward. The pilot said, "We are out of gas. This is only a short hop flight." They wouldn't listen. They forced him to continue. As the gas ran out, the pilot pled with them for a refueling stop. They said no. After hugging the coast, the hijackers threatened to blow up the plane. The pilot turned it out into the Indian Ocean. And when it became evident they would not make it, Captain Leo Abate took the microphone and said, "Listen, guys, we're all dead. There's no stopping it." The people in the plane began to scream. One witness said to the others, some began to pray. The crash is now well known. It was captured by a film of Japanese honeymooning couples. They caught the descent of the 767, the dip of the wing, and the crash. This is what the wife said. As soon as the pilot said the plane is crashing, she said, "I'll never forget the distinct click of my husband's seatbelt." Off went his seatbelt, and down the row of the crashing plane he went, sitting on the armrest, sharing the gospel this way, sharing the gospel this way. She said he would look at me in the back of the plane and signal how many people so far had called on the name of the Lord. She said he made it halfway down the aisle of the plane when it crashed. She said, "I survived. My husband would have survived if he would have sat next to me in his seatbelt." Flight 961 is a lesson. You're going to have to unsnap your seatbelt and talk to the people on this crashing plane. That's why the Lord left us here.